Welcome to this presentation on relationships at work. My name is Katie Reimer-Dewald, and I'm a registered provisional psychologist. I would like to start with a land acknowledgement that's been adapted from the College of Alberta Psychologists website. Responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action, it is with respect and in the spirit of reconciliation and truth, Ottendi's Psychological Group honors and acknowledges that here in Alberta, Treaties 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10, as well as many unsigned treaties, are the traditional and ancestral territory of many diverse Indigenous groups. Namely, they are the Kainai, Piikani, Siksika, Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Stoney Nakoda, Tsuut'ina Nation, Inuit, and the Métis Nation. We acknowledge and give thanks to the many First Nations, Métis Nations, and Inuit peoples who have lived on and cared for these lands for generations, and the many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. We are dedicated to ensuring the spirit of all treaties are honored and respected. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. Okay, so just a little picture of myself here. As formerly mentioned, I am a registered provisional psychologist with Ottendi Psychological Group in Ponoka. A little overview of what we'll talk about today. So we will describe the types of relationships we encounter at work, discuss why relationships are important. We'll define power differentials. We'll talk about healthy workplaces versus toxic workplaces, how we maintain a healthy relationship, and signs of a toxic workplace or relationship. We'll also include what is bullying or harassment and the psychological cost of this. At the end, we will talk about how we can improve workplace relationships and strategies for our mental health and communication. So types of relationships that exist in the workplace, most of us have encountered either a colleague or a co-worker, so kind of an interchangeable name, usually someone who shares the same employer. We're not always part of the same work team, but we usually work at the same site. As well, there are team members. So team members are usually colleagues or co-workers with similar job titles and work together for a common goal or same project. Employees are people who report to you. We have clear boundaries that distinguish these relationships from other types. And we'll go into this a bit more, but a power differential exists between the supervisor and supervisee. Other types of relationships that exist in the workplace are the CEO or owner. So in a larger company, people may not directly report to this person. They set the vision of the company, and they may be the founder or president. The manager is someone who manages assignments, directly supervises productivity. In a small company, they can also be the owner or CEO. Most of us have dealt with clients or customers. They're the person that we provide goods or services to, and we may or may not have direct contact with them, depending on the nature of our job. We can also have work friends. So a work friend is a colleague or a coworker or team member who we work closely with and share space with. We have a deeper connection with them, and we may interact outside of work. A mentor is someone who guides us in our industry. We may go to them for professional advice. They may not work in the same location as us or for the same company. A mentee, on the other side of this, is someone who comes to us for professional advice. So they're usually someone less experienced than us who is seeking our mentorship. So why are good relationships in the workplace important? They create comfort and stability in the workplace. So when we're feeling comfortable and we're feeling supported, we're more open about sharing our ideas. We can be more creative and more productive. They help grow our career. So the old adage of it's not what you know, but who you know. So when we have colleagues and clients who respect us, then our career is more likely to move forward. Good relationships give us the freedom of time and energy. So when we're not wasting time on relationships that are negative or not serving us, then we're able to put more time and energy into our work and into innovation and creation. They fill our need for inclusion and socialization. So if we think about it, we spend about 8 hours a day, so roughly a third of our time at work, which is most of our waking hours. So it's very important that those relationships are strong and healthy. So what is a power differential? We talked about this in the situation of employees versus employers. So it's a natural difference in authority between managers or owners and their employees. Managers have some level of control over how our time is spent at work, the evaluation of our performance, what is done at work, and opportunity for advancement. Okay, so naturally they have a little bit of power over the average person. In a healthy workplace, this differential is handled by setting clear boundaries, acting with respect, giving empathy, and active listening. In an unhealthy workplace, leaders might do one of two things. So they might widen the power gap by enhancing the power differential. So they might do so through tone of voice. They might frequently say things such as, I'm the boss, or I have the power. They may shame employees or use poor communication skills to show their authority in the workplace. On the other side of this, leaders might engage in leaderless behavior or engage in a conflict of interest. So they might befriend their employees, they might have poor boundaries, could be having inappropriate conversations, and it can be very confusing because it's unclear of who is in charge in that situation. So what maintains healthy relationships at work? Ensuring that employees feel heard, so asking for feedback, creating action plans, and then following through with tangible steps in a timely manner. Showing appreciation daily, 82% of employees in a recent survey stated that they wish they received more recognition. So what is recognition? We know that it's personal, it's specific, and it's timely. So it happens soon after whatever the activity was that we're showing appreciation for. We create a physical environment that's comfortable, attractive, and provides the things we need. We develop values and then we practice them within the organization. We develop psychological safety, trust, and a place where people feel safe to express themselves. So knowing that rumors won't be spread and we won't hear about our issues in the gossip. Okay, so give employees what they need, ensure proper staffing, time off, and opportunities for growth. So signs of a toxic or unhealthy workplace, so gossip roaming freely, high employee turnover, poor communication, no motivation, little to no growth, so we're quite stagnant, and constant conflict. So toxic workplaces often also come with toxic stress. What we know about our bodies is that our bodies and our brains are meant to withstand some toxic stress, some large amounts of stress for short periods of time. So acute periods of stress, such as the death of a loved one or a car accident, we're set up for dealing with that. But when stress becomes overwhelming, when it's unbearable and over long periods of time, that's when it becomes toxic. So symptoms of this toxic workplace, so we may feel burnout. So burnout occurs when we're not feeling that what we're putting into the job is worth what we're getting out of it. So we're no longer feeling satisfied with the outcome. We aren't receiving the same messages as others. So there's a disconnect in the information given to us versus our coworkers. We might feel unmotivated, stuck, or stifled. We have little or no work-life balance. So we're feeling frustrated, begrudged, angry, guilty, exhausted when we go home and when we come to work. Or we just have a gut feeling. We just feel like we're not feeling ourselves. Things aren't going as they should be. So another part of a toxic workplace might be bullying and harassment. It can come from any level, so management, colleagues, employees, customers, or general public. Can include verbal aggression, insults, derogatory comments or names, spreading of malicious rumors, hazing, intimidation, vandalization of personal property, degradation and humiliation, actions that cause real or perceived physical harm, so threats of physical harm, constant unwarranted criticism, so feeling like we're never doing enough, willfully excluding someone, or intentionally sabotaging or undermining. So when somebody makes it sound like we're not doing our job when we know that we are. So there's a real psychological cost of a toxic workplace or toxic relationships in a workplace. We see an increase in anxiety disorders, which can feel like restlessness, being on edge, inability to relax, constant feelings of worry, irritability, fatigue, and difficulty with concentration. We see an increase in depression as well, so loss of pleasure in enjoyable activities, increased sadness and crying, emptiness, hopelessness, helplessness, frustration over small things, exhaustion, and self-blame. In really severe circumstances, people can experience symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So they may have recurrent or unwanted distressing memories, flashbacks, upsetting dreams, avoidance, negative changes in mood and thinking, guilt, shame, feeling numb, and constantly feeling on guard or on edge. So how can we fix workplace relationships? This video is about 15 minutes long, so at this point, if you would like to pause and get a snack or a cup of coffee, please do so.
We usually think of conflict as something that happens between people. After all, who's there when things go wrong? People. People can be very annoying. But they're really just the part of the story that's easiest to see. In almost 30 years of working with employees at every level, from warehouse associates and service reps to CEOs, I've seen over and over what happens when we hold the mistaken belief that conflict would not exist if those annoying people would just get themselves together and work things out. Unfortunately, when we operate out of that belief, we tend to say and do things that cause conflict to persist and to create even more damage to both organizations and the people in them. And that's true whether we're talking about businesses or nonprofits, schools, even families and entire societies. If we want to solve conflict, we've got to do some digging. We have to look at the structures that lie underneath the conflict. And I'm going to give you an example and then 5 steps that you can take to fix conflict wherever you are. So a couple of years ago, a CEO brought me in to work with 2 senior executives. I'll call them Amy and Bill. And they were locked in a serious conflict. And the CEO described it to me as a communication problem, and it looked something like this. Now, I interviewed Amy and Bill, and they told me a different story. From their description, the conflict actually looked more like this. They didn't see it as a communication problem. They saw it as differences in departmental opinions about how the work should be done in the company based on their beliefs about each other's functional roles. But then I interviewed Bill and Amy's team members and other people in the organization, and it turned out that the situation really looked like this. You can see that underneath what looked sort of like a person-to-person conflict or a departmental conflict, we have these deeply embedded structures, including everything from company history and cultural norms to work processes and procedures. Now, it seems unrealistic to blame individuals and to treat them as if they have sole responsibility for conflict, when, as you can see, they're really only the tip of the proverbial iceberg. And it also seems unrealistic to think that we can come up with simplistic interpersonal solutions, like sending Amy and Bill off to communication training, or even to anger management classes. No, we have to excavate what's under the conflict and bring it out into the open so that we can analyze, understand, and begin to resolve the human conflict that's building on the top. And now I'm going to give you 5 steps so you can do just that wherever you are. Step 1. We need to rule out the unfortunate possibility that a single dysfunctional individual is actually the source of conflict. I don't mean somebody who makes mistakes. I mean someone who's really a danger. In organizations, a common example of this is someone who's a bully. Bullies don't have the self-awareness to recognize when they're hurting other people. And it's very hard for them to give up whatever kinds of nasty behavior they believe has worked for them in the past. A second common example of the kind of dysfunctional person who can truly be the source of conflict is someone who is an incompetent. They create a lot of mess. They sometimes fake their way into a job, and in other cases, you may have seen people promoted beyond their capability. Now, the lucky thing about workplace conflict is that it is completely legitimate and appropriate to screen out dysfunctional individuals, or to deal with them through a combination of coaching, counseling, and corrective action. So once you have dealt with or screened out your dysfunctional person, you can go on to step 2. And that's asking the right people the right questions. You might think that you should start with the folks who are in control, the people who have power and status, but it doesn't work because they're not close enough to the real action. Instead, you need to interview the people who are experiencing events on the ground. And you need a full range of their opinions, because even though they'll try to give you their honest opinion, each one by its very nature is incomplete, because they're bounded by their individual experiences and their perceptions. So you need a broad range of views. And that permits you, when you have the full picture, to start to see the patterns and dynamics operating underneath. And what kind of questions can you ask? Here are some that I like to use. Can you tell me what goes right here? What's the thing that whenever it happens, it makes you nuts? Is there something that would help you do your job better? And why do you stay if it sounds like there are so many problems here? So let me recap. We rule out the dysfunctional individual, and then we ask the right people the right questions. And that lets us go on to step 3. And that's making sure that everyone is aligned, that they have a consistent understanding of what the goals are, who's responsible for which decisions, and who does what to whom. You would be amazed at how many sincere, well-meaning people can have deep disagreements about goals and means, including fairly obvious things like who has budget authority and who has responsibility for which decisions, and who can take credit for success. An example, at one of my clients, a senior leader assigned overlapping responsibility for the same turf to 2 different executives. These 2 execs and their teams fought for an entire year over who got to call which shots and who was going to take the blame for declining performance results. The human resources group came in, tried to facilitate a truce, encourage better behavior. But until the senior leader left and the overlapping assignments came fully to light and were completely redefined, there was no change. Because it's very hard to think that just a little good behavior, pleasantness, trying harder is going to make a difference when you have 2 different sets of feet standing in the same space. The 4th step is to find allies at all levels in the organization to help you implement the change. Because even if you've ruled out the dysfunctional individuals and you've asked the right people the right questions and you've aligned around the goals and the means, if you don't have a critical mass of participation, nothing substantial is going to happen. At one of my clients, there was a persistent conflict in the executive team itself. I was facilitating a group of mid-level managers, and these people really needed to get their work done. So they were willing to work on concrete, practical solutions together in ways that their bosses were not. Over time, we were able to build bridges across the various departments. These allies communicated the concepts down to their teams, and eventually they were able to start managing up in ways that created better performance, better productivity, and definitely better behavior, even within the executive team. And the fifth step, teach new habits for managing differences. I've talked about the problems with structures and how you have to recognize them and what their impact can be. But from time to time, people do have significant interpersonal communication problems. So it only makes sense to teach some new techniques and habits that can help people deal with the strong feelings and the stressful thinking that conflict brings with it. Here are just a few of the habits I teach my clients. The first one is called lizard listening. I remind clients that our amygdala, our ancient lizard brain, interprets emotional cues as if they were present physical danger, even before we have a chance to assess what's going on or interpret them logically. I encourage them to reconsider what they've just said or are planning to say to their counterpart in conflict, and to think about what will happen when that counterpart filters the conversation through their lizard brain. What misconceptions could come up, inaccurate, negative beliefs? What could be misconstrued, even perfectly good intentions? Are there ways to reframe those negatives so that the next conversation can be more persuasive and more positive? Then we have the evil logic check. When somebody bothers us, we tend to think of them as a bad person. So when clients complain about the bad people they work with, I ask them specifically if they think their counterpart is evil. And that's the word I use because it's so strong. No, they have to step back. She's not really evil, she's just annoying. So then I press it a little bit further. And I ask, why would a smart person do such a stupid thing? This leading question helps people reconsider what's really going on with that annoying person. And sometimes, in addition to the alternative explanations for what they meant, they can even develop some compassion for the annoying person's situation. Because after all, when we label behavior as bad and stupid, it is usually coming from some form of pressure, fear, or threat. And then my favorite are these elephant cards. Sometimes there is something important and true that needs to be said, but it's too uncomfortable. Most of us don't want to be the one to put someone on the spot. We don't like to say something that sounds unkind. It can feel like a real risk to put undiscussable subjects on the table. I distribute these elephant cards at my facilitations. When there's something important going unsaid, anybody in the room can play an elephant card. I have clients who are doing this years later. The very act of playing the card raises the possibility with other people who understand the significance that you can discuss topics which previously would have been impermissible. Okay, so we have ruled out dysfunctional individuals. We've asked the right people the right questions. We've ensured that we have alignment. We've looked for allies to help us implement the change. And we've taught some specific techniques so people feel that they have a better way to communicate with each other. Now, let me tell you, working through these 5 steps, it's not easy. It takes courage and commitment. It takes a little humor, and it takes a heap of effort to get traction on persistent conflict. But if we are ever going to help our schools, our workplaces, and our civic organizations function better, if we want to help people make the real contribution that they can, we have to uncover and understand what's truly underneath any conflict in any situation. Then we can help people work together successfully for everyone's benefit wherever we are. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so on that topic, strategies for better relationships. So some things that we can do is practicing gratitude and creating a positive outlook. So studies show that even thinking of 3 positive things that we are grateful in a day can help to change the way that we're looking at things. It can shift our outlook and change some of the neurotransmitters in our brain to create a more positive experience. We can use strategies to gain control of our emotions. We can use deep breathing exercises, grounding techniques. We can find opportunities to comment on others' expertise, behavior, or kindness. Show interest in others. Practice empathy and gratitude towards others. Practice active listening, which includes maintaining eye contact, expressing interest and asking questions. And we can be assertive and have boundaries. So we're going to talk about examples of I statements, perspective taking, and cognitive restructuring. So how to use an I statement properly. One of the most common mistakes that I often hear in my practice is that when people use I statements, they'll say, I feel mad because you did this. But the intent of the I statement is really to make it a neutral statement. So it's more, I feel angry when people don't show up on time because it wastes my time. And what I need is for people to show up to meetings on time and for all of us to be held accountable. So that's an example of an I statement. Okay, so I feel sad when people don't contact me to let me know they're going to be late because I feel like I'm not valued or respected. What I need is for everybody to agree that we're going to call or text if we'll be late. So that's an example of an I statement. So they can be tricky to use, but they have big value in communicating what it is that we need. Something else we can try is perspective taking. So sometimes when we're locked in conflict with someone, it's difficult to see their side of the story, especially when it's based on opinion. So some questions that we can ask ourselves. How might they explain what has happened from their point of view? What was their upbringing like? How might their own past experiences have led them to behave this way? Could they have meant something different by what they said or did? Have I ever made a similar mistake? Did I play any role in what happened? How might forgiveness help this person? And how might forgiveness help me? So those can be very enlightening questions to ask ourselves when we are having conflict with others. And lastly, what we can do is something called cognitive restructuring. So sometimes the assumptions that we make or the thoughts that we have are actually mistakes. So they're actually not truly what's happening, but they're our own assumption of what's going on. So what we can do with that, so an example of this is given in this graphic. So a friend walks past without acknowledging us, and our automatic thought is, I must have done something wrong for her to be upset with me. So we feel anxious, tension in our stomach. We might be upset with our friend. What we can do is we can shift that thought. So we can think of the evidence for and against it. So what's the evidence that our friend, why she walked past us? Well, we don't really know why she walked past us. Maybe she looked kind of upset. So we can start to think, well, what are the reasons for that? Possibly she's having a bad day. Maybe she's not feeling well. Maybe she has her own things going on. We know that the evidence is that she usually doesn't walk past us. She usually says hi. So it's probably not about us. We haven't had any negative interactions before this. So what we can do is we can shift that thought. We can think, well, that's not quite right. I don't think that she's upset with me. She must have not seen me, or she looks like she has a lot on her mind. Maybe she's having a bad day. So then we're shifting that sensation from anxiety to concern for our friend. We're feeling relaxed. We have a different way of looking at it. Okay, so talking about the grounding exercises, which we had mentioned before for relieving some of that stress and controlling our emotions, something we can use before we go into a maybe high stress or high conflict situation with a colleague or somebody in our workplace, we can do some grounding exercises. So first off is the 5-4-3-2-1 exercise. So what this does is it re-engages our prefrontal cortex. So when we're stressed, our prefrontal cortex, which makes our decisions, thinks logically, decides how we want to act, is kind of offline. We don't have access to it. So we want to re-engage it. So what we can do is we can look around our environment. We can look for 5 things we can see, 4 things we can hear, 3 things we can touch, 2 things we can smell, and 1 thing, if we really wanted, we could taste. Another thing that we can do, especially when we're having some troubling thoughts about the situation, is the leaves on the stream meditation. So sitting for a while with our eyes closed, relaxing, imagining a bubbling stream going by, and there's leaves drifting down the stream. As the leaves float by, we imagine what the thoughts might look like. So the thoughts could be words, they could be a picture. We're taking those thoughts and we're gently setting them on leaves that are drifting down the stream. And as they go, we watch them and we say goodbye to them. So that can be helpful when we get stuck in a loop of thoughts that aren't very helpful to us. There's also the body scan. So the body scan is, I like to tell clients that we imagine we're in a alien spaceship and they're running a laser over our body. So starting at the top of our head, running down slowly, as the laser reaches different parts of our body, we notice if there's tension and we relax. We tell our brain to relax. So we unclench our eyes, our jaws, our necks, our shoulders, all the way down to our toes and then back up again. Okay? So those just kind of, they can calm our brains and give us some time to relax and think about the situation from a different perspective. I've included a link at the bottom with some other grounding techniques that you might find helpful. If you have any questions, comments, or would like to know more about this topic, please feel free to contact me. I've left my email at the end of this presentation. So it's katie@autendye.com, katie@autendye.com. Thank you for your time today.